but just happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
All right, great. Perfect. So why don't we jump in, and I'm just gonna scroll down the screen here, and actually I'm gonna get on the, here we go. This is a better view here. So the first question for our panelists is, why did your library choose this platform, and what are some of the ways that you are using it? So Mark, why don't we start with you, since I've got you first on my list.
Great. Well, good morning, and thanks for joining us this morning. It's great to be here to talk about video conferencing. So we initially, this was already back in March, I believe. So we were looking at video conferencing platforms to use. A couple of things that we were looking for at the time were something that was secure, something that was very easy to set up. A couple of things that impressed us about Jitsi was that it was definitely secure. It didn't have all of the bad, connections that Zoom had at the time, where Zoom had been hacked a couple of times, and there was this whole issue of Zoom bombing going on. We found that to be a host, you had to create an account in order to use it. So we looked at Jitsi and found out that you don't have to have an account for being the host or for a participant to manage the platform. It's free too, which is a really big plus for us. It definitely could work with the browsers, although there is somewhat of a limited browser support for Chromium-based browsers only, for at least right now, though lots of development is happening, so things could change for sure. And it does have a decent support for up to 50 participants. So that was another plus at the time. So I have to admit that, after using it for a couple of months, we found that most folks tend to know Zoom. When you mention video conferencing, they think Zoom, and of course, if you're a Google user, Google Meet was the easiest go-to platform to use. So we have migrated to Zoom for certain things, like for instance, for some of our groups and for our adult programming, and continue to use Jitsi maybe for more staff type of meetings, in-house meetings and such. And I did, on the other hand, train a couple of our library groups, like our senior groups, the Hooksettites, to use Jitsi. And they have stuck with it. They prefer it because, again, there's no account requirement. They like the privacy. It just seems to work pretty well for them. So they've stuck with it. But a few of our other groups, like our photography groups and others, where they were looking for more feature sets, they tended to migrate to Zoom. So I just thought that, it's good for us as librarians to be aware of all of the platforms, and especially and including, open source options out there. So that's how it's been going here for us.
Great. How would you say the learning curve was on getting used to Jitsi for your patrons?
It seemed to be pretty easy. So one of the things that you'll find with Jitsi is that because the user interface is very streamlined and there's not a lot of feature sets or controls, it's a lot easier to work with. Whereas if you'll notice, when you start picking up Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx, the interface can get so cluttered that it's a little bit more challenging for folks who prefer something much easier and simpler to work with. So it's got sort of the very basic feature sets that most folks need, and so it works out pretty well.
Cool. All right, well, why don't we move on to Bobbi and MS Teams. So, why did the State Library choose this platform, and what are some of the ways you're using it?
Hi, everyone. So I will say that everything that Mark just said about Jitsi is probably the exact opposite about Microsoft Teams. But the state chose it, I imagine, because we are a Microsoft Office community, and it made sense in order to integrate Office, to integrate Share, and the meeting platform all into one, and including OneDrive as well. So it is a powerful beast of it's a powerful beast, I will say that, of a platform. And why did they choose it? I imagine it was just because it does everything for all of the state employees.
Hey, Bobbi, is there any way you can turn up your volume there or anything on your end, on the microphone end?
You know what?
We're having a little bit of a hard
No.
time.
Yeah, and I do apologize for that. Unfortunately, all of my microphone settings are blocked when I use Zoom. If I speak up, is this a little bit better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank
Okay.
you. Perfect.
Sorry about that.
And what did the state migrate from again? I can't remember. Was it WebEx or GoToMeeting?
Yeah, we had actually had a free opportunity to use WebEx right through the end of this calendar year, which is why we had it. And frankly, if I had the choice, I think everyone does prefer WebEx, but we just simply don't have the choice at this point.
Okay.
I don't mean to give it a non-glowing review, but it is a powerful beast of an application.
Gotcha. Okay, why don't we move on to Cab? Can you talk a little bit about Google Meet and why you chose that platform and how you're using it?
I can. We use Google Meet primarily for internal meetings and this is staff meetings and also our trustee meetings. Our online programs, for the most part, we've been using Zoom and Facebook Live. So, we have, I think, at least a couple of folks talking about Zoom. So I'll talk just about Google Meet. And we really chose that because it was the path of least resistance. We are a Google Suite library, which means we have Gmail, we use Google Calendar, and it's very well integrated. Google Meet is very well integrated into the whole suite, obviously. And it was just something that was very easy for us to set up with staff. It is probably not the best choice for webinars and online programs, perhaps, but you don't need a Google account in order to participate as a guest. In order to host, you obviously do. But it's a very robust and simple solution for folks who are in Google land, and that's the main reason we chose it.
Okay, great. Next on my list is Julie. Julie, what can you talk about Zoom a little bit and how your library is using it and how you got there?
Sure, and I hope Laura feels free to jump in as well. I don't want to steal all the answers from her. But we basically, we're a small library, and we have a small staff with only a couple people with a high, pretty high tech competency. So we really chose Zoom for the ease of use and our ability to immediately jump onto the whole video conference platform thing. Like we did that immediately in March, even before we closed. So I was really looking for a quick startup, ease of use, something that people could quickly learn and participate in, and it has absolutely delivered in that area. So I know there were the issues with some security things, which I know they've since added a lot of security features. At the time, I didn't even wait to go through TechSoup. I had a grant that I could use, and I took the $99 COVID special for the first year with just one user, and we found we used it so often we needed a second user, so we now have a 2-user license. We use it for everything. We use it for programming, for all ages, from story time with preschoolers all the way to adult book clubs. We use it for trustee meetings. Bringing my trustees up that learning curve was much easier than I expected. So that was great. And but we also used it for tech tutorials. So as soon as we closed and we were using Zoom for staff meetings, we practiced with breakout rooms and all of that. But because you can record your session, we were able to have staff who were working remotely work on creating tech tutorials using the Zoom platform, because so we really only had to teach them one thing. And with the great, varied level of tech competency and comfort level, this was the big win for us. So it, and it didn't really require us to go out and learn a whole lot. I'm sure there are a lot of features. I know actually in preparing for this, I wasn't even that aware of certain features like the closed captioning feature because we hadn't really explored that yet. And that's really been the benefit for us, is that everybody could jump in. Most people are familiar with it. And we've been able to sort of deal with some of those other drawbacks. And I don't want to steal from Laura, so I don't know if she wants to add to that.
Yeah, I had a question, Julie, too, about the tech videos you were making. I mean, that seems like a really cool idea. I think we probably all need to check out your YouTube channel and see what kind of good stuff you guys created. But I'm wondering, did you post directly from, could you upload directly from Zoom to YouTube when you created those tech trainings?
Well, one of the things that, yes. So yes, you can download it to your computer or whatever else you want to do. Like, you know, we do have Adobe if we want to edit or whatever, but we actually had staff who just did their edits in Zoom, you know, so very basic, and so that we could have all different levels. But then, yes, we just would download it and then re-upload it through our Google account.
Gotcha. And I know, Laura, you come at this from sort of that programmer perspective. So I wonder if you have any other interesting things to chime in about why Portsmouth chose Zoom and, you know, what you're using it for.
Yeah, well, our situation was similar to Julie's, where we were experiencing some pressure from some of our regularly meeting groups. Like the minute we closed, how do we meet this week, you know? So for us, it was having, you know, the pressure to do that quickly, but also the fact that we had a couple of staff members who already had been using Zoom and had some expertise. So that was kind of a no-brainer. We didn't do as much research. And probably similarly to Julie, we felt for a couple of weeks, oh shoot, should we have? And then we're relieved to see that Zoom had added some security features. But I think Mark was the one who mentioned that it does have the name recognition that you really can't beat, like Kleenex or Xerox or whatever. People just assume it's going to be on Zoom. So at this point, you know, there was a learning curve for the first 3-4 weeks where we had one person, one email available to answer any questions that people had, and they were getting a lot of questions, and that has really, we've seen a steep drop off. One thing that I hadn't thought about until Julie mentioned that alternate use of Zoom is that we also used it for our library podcast. So we'd been doing the library podcast for maybe 2 years. It's now on hiatus because that is a lot of work. I don't know if anyone else has done that, but audio editing is not my favorite thing, and it's not a great use of taxpayer money from my point of view because it takes forever. But we had a page who was doing our editing for us, and it turned out that using Zoom, particularly when the library was fully closed, to have conversations about books that were then really easily recorded in the cloud, both audio and video, meant that we had that audio ready and there less editing was required. So that was a really cool use for us. And then of course we record a lot of programs now when the presenter is amenable to that. And it's really easy to do the video editing for that and put it up on YouTube, because all you really have to do is clip the beginning and end, and then it's serviceable for people to rewatch. And that is a huge benefit from my point of view. Something we weren't really doing, or it would have been more difficult to do for in-person programs. So that's one feature of Zoom that I really appreciate, is cloud recording. And the other thing I wanted to say about it, to add to what Julie said, is in terms of features, it is relatively easy to add or take away things. So we did use the TechSoup discount, which gives you 50% off, and is still available. I just checked. And that gives you 50% off any add-ons as well. So I wanted to mention that it's $225 a year for us because we have 3 users now. And we started with 1, and like Julie realized that we needed to add a second. Ours was for youth programming. So now we have a main programming, a youth programming, and we added a third for specifically staff meetings or admin. That would be the one we use for trainings and stuff too, because we had a conflict with a board meeting that went terribly. So now we have those 3 users. That works really well for us. We do a lot of programs, so that probably wouldn't be necessary for every library. But we also pay $25 a month for a large meeting add-on, which allows us to host programs with up to 500 people. And you can also pay for up to 1,000. You can pay for a webinar add-on, and there are other things as well. That's a month-to-month service, and you can stop it at any time. So although that is a significant amount of money, it's nice to me. First, the discount is obviously great if you have TechSoup, but also the fact that you can stop and start these things as you need them.
Excellent. And all of our panelists did fill out the answers to all these questions that you see on your screen here. And we'll share those in addition to the recording of today. So you'll get to see even more details maybe than what's been shared so far, but just wanted to let you know that. So we can move on to the next question here. Tell us about some of the security features and settings for the platform you're using. And Mark, I'll just jump back to you to start.
Sure. Yes. So, so one of the features that we particularly are impressed with Jitsi was the end-to-end encryption, which is available on the platform. So this means that there is, you know, pretty much a secure connection between you, basically your device that you're using, and to the user. In this case, of course, the participants. So that was very important to have. Although there is a caveat, and I think this applies to a lot of other platforms too, that if you do have the encryption enabled, it does prevent recording or streaming. Because you can't preserve that the integrity of the encryption when you start introducing those other feature sets. We also liked the fact that there is what is called a lobby mode. So this is kind of what you like the waiting rooms you might hear about with the other platforms. So there's Jitsi just calls it the lobby mode. So this allows the meeting host to moderate any new participants coming on board. It has password protection, so you can actually password protect meetings. So folks would actually need the password to access as well. What's also kind of neat too is that you can create your own, I wouldn't call it a vanity type URL, but basically when you use Jitsi, you create your own meeting ID or name. So you can actually, you know, make it as sophisticated as you want, or just make it in such a way that it kind of, you know, speaks to the meeting itself in terms of, you know, maybe just calling it like NHLA-ITS _, whatever description you want to give it, so that meeting participants can actually kind of more easily identify by it or to it. It also, basically it's open source. So as we know, as librarians, when things are open source, folks have full and complete access to the code. So you can actually visit the Jitsi website. Jitsi actually is the name of several projects. And so there's a link on their website so that if you wanted to, you could actually study all of the code. Unlike other platforms that are proprietary like Zoom and Google Meet and others, you just don't know what's in the code. And they, of course, could be, you know, there could be vulnerabilities in the code that you don't know about or that others have already exploited. You know, we know, of course, some of these platforms have been known to snoop on users. So the point is that Jitsi, you know, is somewhat immune from that charge just because of the fact that anybody can actually inspect the code.
Gotcha. All right. And so Bobbi, can you speak to the same question for MS Teams as far as security features and settings for the platform?
Yeah, definitely. I hope everyone can hear me a little bit better this time. Is that better, Matt?
Yep, definitely.
Sorry. Yeah, definitely that does offer end-to-end encryption. I just did a quick search to see whether or not it's actually encrypting during a recording, and it doesn't say that it's not. So Microsoft does really pride itself on being the most secure platform. I mean, we hear it week after week. I attend the statewide team champions meetings, and they really drill that into us. And as far as other type of security things, yes, there is a lobby. And it is possible to bypass the lobby or just allow certain people to bypass the lobby. But that's been a really great feature. And it's also possible to remove people from a meeting with a simple right click of the mouse on the person. And you can expel someone from the meeting.
And then, so we can move on to you, Cab. Can you talk a little bit about Google Meet and some of the security features and settings on that platform?
Sure. We haven't explored these in depth, primarily because it's me just sending out an invite to trustees and staff. And I don't think the word is getting out very far beyond them. It does not offer end-to-end encryption. It is encrypted in the sense of, HTTPS and, other basic encryption features. But, again, this is not something that's a primary concern for us. I believe there is a waiting room for folks who have not received an official calendar invite. But again, for us, when we're not using it as a webinar and broadcasting it to potentially hundreds of people in the community, we're not too concerned about that. I'm not sure if you can actually password protect a meeting. I think once you send out the invite, it may include everything that's required to participate. As the host, you are able to mute and I believe kick people out. And although I've been tempted to mute my staff and trustees, I have not gone so far as to do that yet.
Gotcha. All right, so that brings us on to Julie and talking about Zoom and security features and settings.
Sure, and thanks. So as Laura mentioned, yeah, we all had a little panic when we started with Zoom, and they had all kinds of crazy things, but they've actually really done a lot in the last year to enhance security. And I believe it was last October they rolled out end-to-end encryption. I don't believe there are some features that are limited with that, just like some of these other platforms, like you can't use breakout rooms, and I don't think you can do recordings if you enable end-to-end encryption. But the big thing that we use is we definitely use the waiting room feature for everything. So even public meetings. So all of our programs, we require registration for people to get the Zoom info and the passcode, and we password protect everything. Doesn't matter what it is. So they do have to have that, but of course a public meeting you have to post. So we do post our public trustee meetings with the information, but we do use the waiting room, and just like MS Teams, it's a one-click to remove anybody from the meeting. One of the things we do, just as in general, even pre-COVID, we had a tendency to always have 2 staff members for a program. We just felt like that was a positive thing to do anyway. That was great staff support. It created a different dynamic in our programs, to have staff actually collaborate in the programs. So we've actually continued that even via Zoom, which allows us to always have a staff member with their eye on that security. So if anything, starts to go awry, knock on wood, it hasn't happened yet, but we're prepared for someone to remove somebody from the meeting. And the waiting room's nice too, because you actually have a list of registrants, and so you know who's coming in. And if somebody isn't who you think, you can actually address that. So knock on wood, we haven't had any issues and with that. So
Good. And Laura, do you have anything to add from Portsmouth's perspective as far as that security and settings go?
Yeah, we have a similar sort of setup for all youth events. Those you do need to register to get the Zoom link for, and all of our Zoom links are password protected. But for all of our ongoing programs, like we have language discussion groups, book discussion groups, a world affairs discussion group, things like that, we use the personal meeting room for one of our Zoom accounts so that the link is the same forever for all of these like very regular meeting groups. That has worked out really well for us. We have had one Zoom bombing incident, but the combination of some of the security features that Zoom has added made it really easy to deal with, where you can both immediately remove somebody and block them. And we have a policy that we generally don't let people into the meeting late, beyond 10 minutes or so into the start of the meeting, because that tends to be when Zoom bombing happens. We have heard from a couple of other libraries regionally that have had more intense Zoom bombing issues. And that was why from the start, we made sure that all of our youth programs, you have to register, and you will only receive the Zoom link by email if you've registered. and that we do check more clearly the waiting room. But some of our programs have 250 to 500 participants. We've had a few different things that have blown up. If you're curious, Wild Edible Plants, our Indigenous Stories series, these things, they just go nuts on Facebook. And so for those, it would be impossible for us to check the waiting room against the registrants, but those we do require registration. And like I say, I haven't had too many issues. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, because somebody asked in the chat about using a webinar version of Zoom for programs. I have not done that yet. I do have plans to do that for something coming up. But for us, it has worked well when we have over, say, 50 people to turn off all audio and video, and you can automate it so that anyone coming in has their video turned off, and you can mute everybody and not allow them to unmute themselves. So that has worked well enough for us because the webinar add-on is an extra cost. We haven't felt that it was necessary to do that yet. But I am starting to maybe plan a sex ed for adults program series. This is just in the idea stage. So that one, I think I will enable a webinar so that no one can say or show anything.
Thank you for answering that question, Laura. I was going to bring it up at this point since you and Julie were talking. We have used the webinar feature here at our library a little bit. And you could reach out to us here at the Concord Public Library. Ashley Miller is our programming librarian. She'd be a good person to talk to. But yeah, I think I hosted one early on in March, just a author talk using the webinar feature. And it was kind of nice to automatically have everyone with no video and no talking. But at the same time, I think at that point we were doing it mostly out of probably concern for like Zoom bombing and stuff like that. And now that was early on, so we weren't as comfortable with it at that point. But so it did work well, although you do miss that kind of talking back and forth dialogues for some types of programs. So, all right, we can move on to our third question here. Are there any beneficial accessibility and ease of use options associated with your platform? So Mark, why don't we jump back to Jitsi?
Sure. So I would say one of the first things that occurs to me for its ease of use is that, creating the meetings is very easy. It's as easy as just visiting the website homepage and creating the name for the meeting itself in a browser. Pretty much any browser that's Chromium based. I have to admit that it doesn't play terribly well with like the older version of Microsoft Edge, but the newer Edge, which is now Chromium based, works well. Chrome, it works very well with. And so those are very popular browsers now anyway. It's getting better with Firefox, but it's still somewhat buggy. So in terms of using any browser to get started up and running with the meeting is phenomenal. In addition to which, with these other platforms, what often happens is you actually have to download yet another little installer, or sometimes it's not clear whether you can actually, access a meeting just with the browser. You're just presented with all kinds of options that make it more confusing. With Jitsi, that's not the case. It's just you simply visit the website and take things from there. The other thing that I would say is that there's no account required. So having no need to create a host account or participant account, it makes it a lot easier to get up and running very quickly. In terms of like closed captioning services and all that, right now there isn't anything, at least with the browser version, although if you host this on your own, which I don't know if I mentioned before, you can actually, since this is open source, you can actually create your own version of Jitsi on your own server and get it up and running. And then yes, with add-ons or plugins, you can actually have closed captioning services installed and running from there. There are mobile apps available. So if you are using a tablet or such, there's an iOS as well as an Android mobile app available for each of those platforms. So that makes it kind of helpful.
Excellent, good. Bobbi, why don't we move on to MS Teams, and are there any accessibility features there you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to know is that the host does require an account. Now this account can be anywhere from free up to $20 a month. And the more expensive the account is, the more other Microsoft features you do get from it. So there's a value added to that. But The actual participants do not need to have an account, as those of you who have participated in any of our state discussions recently have discovered. Let's see here. And there's no app required. You can also, guests can also log right in or just join a meeting without having to, without having to have an actual account. So one thing that's really great about MS Teams, I will say, is the closed captioning or the transcription. They do a absolutely horrifyingly amazing text-to-speech feature. We've turned it on during meetings and it is beyond spot on. And what's really interesting is that they're actually rolling out a transcription model, and that'll be rolling out to our platform sometime in the next few weeks, where you don't even need to take notes during a meeting. It will actually identify different people speaking and annotate and transcribe the entire meeting. So for good or bad, it's truly excellent.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I noticed that in your write-up. And please correct me, any of the panelists, if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of the other platforms we were talking about have something built in like that that's quite so robust. It sounds like you have to use add-ons and plugins and that type of thing.
Google Meet actually does have a pretty decent sort of live transcribing as you speak. It basically uses voice to text. I don't know if you've used it at all, Kat, but we've used it here. It's not too bad.
We have used it and it actually works very well. I mean, we have had a few issues where, I think I posted to the ITS list about, our main issue is for the trustee meetings, at least, where we actually may have a hybrid meeting, some folks at home, some folks in the building. The folks in the building are actually in a very large space spread out, and we have really not cracked the audio. Investing in a, sort of a microphone setup where everyone has their own microphone is, we thought that was too complicated. So I just purchased something called a cue ball, which is essentially a tossable microphone. And so, we're hoping, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to get it to work. But the reason I mentioned this is because up till now, we've had a single omnidirectional microphone in the center of the room. And the folks participating remotely have said that the transcription on the captions, for them at least, is not nearly as good as what I'm seeing live on the laptop directly in front of me. So I think if you had microphones where you had good sound quality, I'm just not sure why the person on the other end, I'm not sure if Google Meet was taking care of transcription on the other end rather than locally, which makes no sense to me, but it's, I'm not exactly sure why that's set up that way, but like Mark said, the captions that at least I'm seeing on the laptop are indeed, very accurate. I don't think there's a way to save that. So it's not nearly as robust as what I think Bobbi was talking about in terms of that transcription service.
Oh, well, that's good to know, though. That's good that Google Meets has some functionality there too. That's good.
Yep.
All right, and then we can stay with you, Cab. Anything else there as far as accessibility and ease of use?
Well, being a Google product, it's entirely browser-based. So I don't know which browsers folks are using. I am using Edge these days, but I think folks are probably using either Chrome or Firefox when they're at home, and there have been no issues there. So there's no separate, application or program to download for folks. It's purely browser-based. If you do want to use it, at least on a cell phone, I'm not sure about iPads and tablets, but at least on a cell phone, Google will prompt you to download an app, which to me, that's a bit of a extra friction that folks probably don't need. But at least in our case, folks are, they're on their laptops for the most part. I think that's all I can think of in terms of accessibility related issues.
Okay, good. And then Julie, do you want to talk a little bit about beneficial accessibility and ease of use options for Zoom?
Sure. So we it does require that the host have an account, but guests do not have to have an account. So they do have the option of using it in their browser without having to download anything. However, just like Cap said about being prompted for apps on a device, they are prompted to download the Zoom app. For us, that created a little bit of a snag initially because we do have our Chromebooks, our library Chromebooks are on the admin console, so they're pretty much locked down. So we ran into a conflict using Zoom on those without having to change that configuration. And we were all set to try to jump through that hoop, and then decided instead that it was actually easier to just put the app on all our iPads. So we're not actually using the Chromebooks with patrons who are in the library being on Zoom. We're actually having them use the iPads instead. And that's just been so easy. That's made it really, really easy for people, because basically we have people who join in from home for various things. But, you know, like, for example, I had an adult book club that was largely seniors. So we just had them in different, they were all online, not in the same room with each other on different iPads, where we basically set it up and they were just talking like it was the Jetsons, and they thought that was amazing. So from that standpoint, it's been pretty easy. It's also pretty easy to walk people through things to get them set up if they do have a device and they're doing it from home, because it's a simple downloading of an app. For Thanksgiving, we had seniors come in and we arranged Zoom chats with their relatives in other parts of the country. So we were communicating with those relatives who didn't necessarily have a lot of tech skills either. And it was pretty easy if someone has a smartphone to enable it for them. We haven't used the closed captioning option. And as I said, it wasn't actually until preparing for this discussion that I really explored that. And it does have that you can have someone who's in the meeting be typing to provide closed captioning sort of in that moment. And it supposedly, anyway, does support a third-party integration. I think Laura probably can speak to that better because she's exploring that.
Yeah, Laura, do you want to jump in and talk about anything from Portsmouth's perspective?
That is something we've discussed quite a lot, is accessibility for folks who are hearing impaired. And so we've started experimenting with Otter AI, but I can't say that much about it because we haven't, my first goal is to do it with a big program. And I haven't done it enough to say it's really good, but I've heard from other folks that it is. I've also heard from folks who have done sign language interpreting, but again, that does require you to know sign language. And some of the folks who are hearing impaired who have asked for this type of service don't speak sign language, so it's not accessible for them. So it is sort of an interesting area that I think we're going to get better at. I did want to say along the same lines that Julie was discussing devices that this works on. For us, it has been nice that Zoom, you can even host the meeting from a smartphone or an iPad because we have staff who don't have devices that will work at home. Chromebooks don't work with Zoom very well. I don't know what it is. So that's one thing to note. Say if all your staff have Chromebooks, it's going to be a little bit tricky, but we haven't had issues with any other devices.
Great. Yeah, that's some interesting format for programming too, Julie. I hadn't heard of a lot of libraries doing like a, in the library book discussion, but via Zoom in different sections of the library. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it really helped because our seniors were really hesitant to go for an online book club or any kind of online programming, but it's gone on long enough. So they were ready to step outside their comfort zone, but they don't have the technology at home. A lot of people in my community don't have broadband access, even if they did have the device at home. So it's just worked out to be just another way of teaching tech too. And it's really the empowerment has been astounding, both staff and seniors in the community. And some of our senior staff who never in a million years thought they would be able to do this kind of thing. And they're now hosting video conference programming. And that's that's just cool in and of itself to see people feel so empowered with technology. And I didn't realize I didn't answer the screen sharing, and I'm sure Laura can too, that yes, we use screen sharing all the time. So both for programs and trustee meetings, it is a godsend for trustee meetings.
Yep, Mark, you got something?
Yeah, if I could jump in there on that point, I have to admit, I use Zoom a lot for tech support because there's a feature in Zoom that allows you to take the remote control of the computer on the other end if the person allows it. So I actually use it a lot for tech support sessions that I have.
Yeah, that's a great feature. All right, we can move on to our final question here. And just a reminder to all the attendees, please do send in questions via the Q&A, and we are keeping an eye on the chat too, so you could certainly post something there. We'll watch for it. But are there any other notable pros and cons for the platform that you're using? And Mark, we can start with Jitsi again.
Sure. So with a lot of the platforms, you're seeing a lot of these virtual backgrounds or virtual filters you can use. So Jitsi doesn't have that, which is kind of a bummer, but it does have background blurring. So if you wanted to kind of blur out your background so that folks can't see where you're at, if it's not such a desirable environment, you can do that. But that's one feature that would be great to have for sure. But so I would say that maybe that's somewhat of a negative. You can record meetings. You can record them by live streaming directly to YouTube if you want. So that's kind of a cool feature. I would also add that the fact that it's as a pro, the fact that it's open source, it offers self-hosting, meaning that you could install it on your own server and have your own instance of Jitsi Meet. That's kind of cool. It's a very streamlined interface, so that's got to be pretty attractive to lots of people, like it has been for our senior folks. And it supports full HD, and you can actually manually change that if you find that your connectivity isn't so good. You can actually change that video quality to maybe only standard as opposed to HD, and that often can help users who have very poor bandwidth at home. There is a calendar integration available for both Google Calendar and Microsoft Outlook, so that's a cool feature, as well as that thing that I mentioned before about the vanity meeting URLs. That's a cool feature. In terms of the cons, I'd have to say, again, it's not as widely known as Zoom and Meet and Teams. So because those are such big names in the video conferencing world, a lot of people are not quite sure what to make of Jitsi Meet, so that's kind of a challenge to get over that hump. I would say another con would be that it would be great if it could be supported better with things like the Safari browser or Firefox, although development is always in the works, so that could change very quickly for sure. That's yeah, so I would say that's about it. Oh, and on the plus side too, what's kind of nice about Jitsi is that you can screen share, but guess what? Actually, all users could potentially share their screen if they wanted to at the same time. But I don't know if that's necessarily a desirable feature, but it's available.
Great. I did see a question come in here in the chat, and it has to do with Zoom. Can Julie and Laura, do you see that question that just came in?
Yes, I can answer it, and Julie, maybe you can chime in if I missed something. So the short answer is no, they won't always see you as the large picture because they always have the ability to change the view. Sorry, let me restate the question for anyone who isn't looking at chat. When you use Zoom for a program and choose Spotlight for yourself, does that mean that participants will always see you as the large picture, or is it different according to how they have their screen set up? So I guess the answer is yes. You can encourage people to choose speaker view and talk them through how to do that. If you're asking about a story time, you can't make children do anything, in my experience. So, but I mean, encouraging them to start that way is probably good. You can't force it. So that might be the kind of thing where a webinar would be a nice option, although story times are interactive, right? So for kids, you probably want to be able to see them as well. The other thing I wanted to mention about that is that you now have the ability in Zoom to spotlight more than one video, which is really nice for like panel discussions like this one, or a sort of Q&A session at the end. However, your participants need to have the most recent update for Zoom in order to see those spotlit videos. So they would end up just seeing speaker view. Well, if they're on speaker view, they would end up just seeing one video at a time unless they had the newest version of Zoom. And I mean, you can assume that a certain percentage of people will have the newest version of Zoom, but not all. So that's a kind of tricky area I think eventually will be sorted out in time.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So let's move on to Bobbi. Do you have any pros and cons to share for MS Teams?
Yeah, and hey, I just want to address Barbara's question really quickly that Laura just answered. On MS Teams, there's a bit of a workaround for making people see who you want them to see. And I'm not sure if this could be applied to other platforms or not, but with MS Teams, you can share your screen and you would be sharing the participant panel. And from there, you pin the people you want them to see. So you can always pin who you want to see, but when you share your screen, you're actually sharing who you've pinned. And of course, there's a slight glitch in that, in that if you want them to see you, you cannot pin yourself. So you have to ask a coworker to actually share their screen, pin you and the other speakers, but that effectively does narrow the view down to that shared screen and those people. So it's a bit of a workaround, but it might apply to other platforms. So you just never know. Just very simply, yeah, MS Teams does allow for some virtual backgrounds and filters, and they're quite good actually. You can record, not on the free version, but you can definitely record, and it does tell people that you are recording the event. And finally, does the platform support co-host? Oh yeah, and if anyone was on the last directors meeting, you'll notice how quickly and easily it is for a participant to share their own screen, but there are options within MS Teams where you can go in and say, only people from my organization can share, or other things like that. So there's definitely some security things that you can put into place, including that you're the only person that shares the screen. That's all.
Great. And so Cab, do you want to jump in with some pros and cons for Google Meets?
Sure. I mean, the biggest pro is basically if you're already in the Google ecosystem, it's, it couldn't be simpler. The major downside is it does not appear to be as full featured as the Zooms, the WebExes, the MS Teams. And like I said, we haven't really been using it for online presentations with the public. So, I mean, I just don't have the experience to really speak to that. I know Google is, for years has been making a major push into the education space. So I would be shocked if the education versions, which I believe are paid, they may have been grant programs, but libraries unfortunately don't qualify for that program. But they're paid versions, and there are paid nonprofit versions. They're paid versions for businesses, and those will get you more features, including more participants, screen recordings that are then automatically saved to Google Drive. So there are more bells and whistles, but they're the bells and whistles we don't care about. So we have no experience with them. So for us, the major advantage is certainly that it's already well integrated into our workflow, and setting up a staff meeting once a week or every other week or whatever, you send out set up the event on your calendar. It prompts you to send an invite, you send it, and you're done. So for us, it's the simplicity for internal purposes that was the major draw.
Gotcha. Excellent. So Julie, do you want to touch base on any pros and cons for Zoom?
Sure. So it does support virtual backgrounds. That does require someone to actually have downloaded Zoom, though, to enable that. I think. I don't know, Laura, if that's still true, but that was certainly in the beginning. You can record meetings and events, and the co-host feature is simple, but it does have to be people in on your Zoom account. Other than once you get in the meeting. So you can, like, if you want to create a co-host at the very beginning, like, you know that one person may be late coming to the meeting, you can create a co-host for other people in your organization to start the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, though, you can choose anyone to be a co-host. And that's been really helpful for us, particularly in trustee meetings. So I can, I have screen sharing limited to people I choose to be co-hosts, so that we don't have anybody throw something up there that we don't want. But in a trustee meeting, that's great. So I can make the treasurer a co-host, and she can bring up on her screen, you know, her reports for the month, et cetera. So we were able to sort of move that around in a meeting, and that's been really, really helpful. I guess the big thing I would say is, while it was a little dicey there in the beginning with all the Zoom bombing, I don't regret our choice. I think it's been a really positive thing and easy to use.
Good. So before we jump over to Laura, I just want to mention we do have 2 questions that came in. I think I'll save Donna's till the end. We're almost finished with our questions for the panelists. But Nancy had a question about how do you add a co-host in Zoom? Do they need a registered Zoom account? Can Julie or Laura answer that one?
So they do, if you're talking about adding a co-host before the meeting, then yes, then they need to actually be associated with your Zoom account. But in the meeting itself, it's just the click of the button. There's a drop-down menu that you can enable someone to be a co-host during the meeting. So then, no, they can have joined by any method. So it's really just a one-click option.
And I would echo what Julie said, that you should change your settings so that no one can share their screen unless they are a host or a co-host, because it is so easy to make someone a co-host even if you didn't plan to ahead of time.
Gotcha. And did you have any other pros and cons you wanted to share, Laura, that come to mind?
One of the things that was dicey in the beginning about Zoom is there were a couple of changes to the settings with, like, in my opinion, not enough notice or no notice, and a couple of our links just changed and I never figured out why, and things like that. So that was a hectic time in April, but none of that has happened since. So I think it was probably, honestly, the company coping with a huge amount of usage in such a short time, and trying to up their security features at that time as well. So I don't have any complaints along those lines. There's a few things that are fiddly, like in the chat. It's really easy to accidentally reply in a private message to somebody instead of into the whole chat and things like that. But otherwise, there aren't a lot of cons for us right now. One of the big pros for me recently has been we turned on a setting where we automatically save the chat from every program. Now, for privacy reasons, I try to go through and delete those once I don't need them. But that is really nice because a lot of our programs end up being very chat heavy or like link heavy, where the presenter is sharing a lot of links in the chat. So we can grab that information afterward and email it to all the participants. And that has been a really useful feature.
Cool. And Nancy had a follow-up question, I believe, too. She said, we can allow any other person to share screen, but not selected one. I think we talked a little bit about that. Anything you would add, Julie and Laura, as far as that goes?
Maybe Nancy could elaborate in the chat, because I'm not 100% sure what she means.
I was going to say the same thing.
Nancy, if you're still with us and you want to send in some more details on that, we can try and get you a better answer. Okay, so when we allow share screen, we only have just me or anyone. So apparently those are the only 2 options that they're seeing. Yeah.
I wonder if it's if you're using a free account, perhaps that's why. Although I'm pretty sure that free accounts can designate co-host as well. So I think you want to set it to just me and then experiment and see if you can set somebody else as the co-host, and that allows them to share their screen. I'm not sure if you have a paid account or not. I haven't encountered that. Have you, Julie?
Yeah, No, that would be my question, but she says it's not a free account. It should be that it's just you, and you can't add a co-host in your settings for the meeting. The key is to get into the meeting, and that's where you share the co-host. I'm not sure if that's where you're trying to, you have to actually wait till you're in the meeting, they're in the meeting, and then you can enable them as a co-host.
Okay. Setting co-host. I'm not doing this by setting co-host. Okay. And that, yeah, and perhaps. Oh, okay, she's going to check on the initial settings. Okay, great. Nancy, if you still have questions and stuff, feel free to reach out to us individually. I'm sure Julie or Laura or any panelists here probably would be willing to try and help you out. So we did have this other question that came in from Donna, which is really interesting. Wondering if there was any info on Ring Central. I noticed that Dover uses this for story time. Not familiar with this. And I'm not familiar with Ring Central either. Any panelists familiar with it? Or if there's someone from Dover that wants to mention in the chat that they're here, we could certainly let you talk and share some info on that.
I could speak to that a little bit. I remember one of our patrons was interested in that because they were not interested in using Zoom or any other platform. They only wanted to focus on like a phone type of connecting platform because they figured a lot of their it was a condo association, if memory serves me correctly, and they knew that a lot of their folks were not tech savvy, but they had phones. So using a telephony type of conferencing platform was better for them. But I've noticed that in checking a little bit further in a lot of these services that a lot of even these originally only phone type services are adding video conferencing services as well. So that's the only thing I can think of on that subject.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me all right? This is Mark from Dover.
Yep, we can hear you, Mark.
Awesome. Thanks very much for this presentation. I'm learning quite a bit. Yeah, we use Ring Central over at Dover, and that is something that's acquired through the city. I believe that it was alluded to before that there was an incident in the local area. So we had a Zoom bomb pretty early on. I wasn't there at the time, but it was rather traumatic. And so the city IT department then decided that since we were already using Ring Central for the citywide phone services, that it would be the thing to use for the video conferencing as well. And we really have not had very much trouble with it. It has some security features that Zoom has since caught up with. It is very similar to Zoom in the breadth of its features, and for people who hop on it, once you're in, it feels very much like Zoom, and it looks a lot like Zoom. At the beginning, Zoom didn't have quite all the security features, and so Ring Central was the option then. The real downside to it is that not a lot of people know about it or are familiar with it, and so for our book groups, for example, there was a learning curve and some tech instruction that had to happen to get people into the sessions. But overall, it has plenty of security features, and I would consider it one of the more premium services because of the cost involved, which, as I said, is covered by the city for us.
Okay, great. Thanks for chiming in, Mark. We appreciate the information, and that was a great question, Donna. Thank you for putting that out there. While I wait to see if we have any other final questions, we've got a little bit of time left here, so please do put those in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll just point out the comparison guide here. Mark found this, and this is on TechSoup, so you can find that there. And I put this link in the chat as well, so if you want to look at that, you can. Kind of a nice little breakdown of some of the platforms we talked about today: Zoom and Teams and Google Meet, Blue Jeans, WebEx, and looks like, yeah, Workplace by Facebook. Okay, so that's a nice handy little guide that might come in, might be useful to you all. Panelists, do you have anything else that you think you might want to add or chime in about before we go? Yeah, Mark, I see you.
Yeah, yeah. The only other thing I would mention, and it's kind of a plug for Microsoft Teams, is that if you're a Windows 10 computer user, you'll notice now Teams is actually native. It's baked in. You'll start seeing a little in your system tray, a little icon there to start a meeting at any time. So if you're a Windows user, you can't be any easier to start a Teams conference.
Cool, very cool.
Yeah, if I can jump in with that, I will say I do knock on Teams a little bit, but it's not so much that I should knock on Teams. It's probably that I should knock on the fact that and I understand why they do it, but the state of New Hampshire is quite restrictive on Teams, and they put a lot of things into place that does make things challenging at times. So, but as far as the integration goes into the work life, it is a powerful beast. I mean, powerful being the operative word, but it is very, very convenient as well. So if your town moves in that direction, it's not a bad thing. It's just it can be very restrictive.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions come through, so I'll just take a moment to thank our panelists once again. Really appreciate you all sharing your time and everything you know about your platforms. We lead busy lives these days and crazy schedules, so very much appreciated. And we've had some nice comments in the chat thanking you as well. And thank you to all of our attendees too. Please go ahead and post anything else you want to share in the chat. We appreciate that. I understand if anyone that needs to go now is perfectly welcome to go, and we're going to go ahead and continue on with a very short ITS meeting at this time. And you're welcome to stay and share more tech news at your library and that sort of thing.